Greetings everyone, welcome back to Lamex Effects. Okay, I can do this. So, I presented an idea that I could explain why so many Japanese stories seem to match what Black and Hispanic people go through. And I plan to use Onimusha to explain this. Now, I had an entire set of videos for this, just several scripts written out, but I found a simpler way to explain things, so I'm going to try that. Oh, by the way, do not mind my downer voice. It's not that I'm sad or anything. Actually, it's that my mind creates connections with everything I see. So if I talk about Onimusha, I may end up mashing 3, maybe 4 subjects into one paragraph and talking about the connections between all of them at the same time. And you'll be confused. And if you want to see the connections that I see, then I'm going to need to slow down and relax. And don't be so energetic. That's not who I am anyway. So, the question is, why do so many Japanese video games seem to resemble Black history? Well, the reason is Black people were in Japan and told them the Black history. What does that have to do with actually finding Black people, or at least a representation of Black people in Onimusha? You'll see. Just let me prove this point first. The point that Black people were in Japan. So, in order to prove that Blacks told the Japanese people Black history, I must prove that they were in Japan. So, according to the more easily found history, the one that you actually can find that I didn't need to dig for, the first recorded Black person to arrive in Japan was called Yasuke. And the story of Yasuke is a Portuguese Jesuit priest named Alessandro Vilignano. Dang, I cannot pronounce that. Brought a Black slave to Japan in 1581. Now, when Oda Nobunaga met this Black man, he bought him and named him Yasuke. And since Yasuke is Black, then that would prove that, yes, Black people actually were in Japan. But, that is only one Black man. And for the Japanese to have enough Black stories to write their video games, we're going to need more. Lots more. Now, according to the not so easily found history, I've gotten a booklet called First Impressions. Wait. Okay, I did a search for the passage I was going to use, and I found the actual name of the booklet on a Japanese website. It is called Excluded Presence, Shoguns, Minstrels, Bodyguards, and Japan's Encounters with the Black Other by John G. Russell. Anyway, this book says that Black people were in Japan long before the Caucasians got there. So, yeah, Yasuke was not the first one. For example, this Sakanoe Tamuramato, explain to me why I can pronounce a Japanese name more easily than an Italian one, or a Portuguese one. Anyway, Sakanoe Tamuramato is of African descent, and this is proof that Blacks were in Japan for much longer than you think. And not only that, but Sakanoe, wait, which one is the last name? Anyway, this is showing him as the first shogun in Japan and a warrior. So that's the history of this Black man. Now, this book does say something about the Ainu, but we'll probably talk about that later. There's something about the Ainu might be Black. But anyway, the point is that Blacks were in Japan long before the 1500s. That means Blacks had a lot of time to tell the Japanese their history. Now, if the Japanese document those accounts, then anyone who visits a library in Japan will be able to get this information. So, any Japanese person would have access to this Black history. And now that you know that the Japanese have access to Black history, let me tell you about story writing. Something that I learned in college. The thing is, when you're trying to craft a grand story, if you want the reader to feel connected to your hero or the world in general, You must make your characters suffer. Give them some pain that your reader can read and say, dang, if I went through this, I can understand why the person is going through their story. I know why they do what they do. So that's the thing. You need to make your character suffer. Now, if the Japanese want to make a great story, then they're going to take inspiration from whoever has suffered and add that history to their own stories, right? Now, to date, no one has suffered as much as Blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans. That means if the Japanese have access to Black and Hispanic history and they want to add suffering in their story, then they're going to include Black history in their stories. That is why so many Japanese stories contain Black history and the Black person situation. Okay? Now, that's 1 point down. Now, I must give an example. For some reason, I get the feeling that someone's going to say that I should use the example that the Japanese anime seems like such a hodgepodge of every mythology under the sun, so that if you turn on anime, you will find everything from every god and mythology under the sun, from the Caribbean islands with their Joy Boy to European folklores like Little Red Riding Hood, and different variations of how they'll tell all these stories. So to say that they took Black history and put in Onimusha would not be out of the question, because that's what the Japanese do for all their stories when they have anything that they can reference. But anyway, so you would have asked what any of this has to do with Onimusha. Well, if the Japanese had access to Black history, then they would have put it in a game like Onimusha, right? So, if my claim is I can find Black history in Onimusha. So let's see if we can find it. Now, remember that article that excluded presents, Shogun's minstrels, bodyguards, and Japan's encounters with the Black Other by John G. Russell? Yeah, since I found that in a Japanese website, that definitely means the Japanese had it, right? So, since it talks about Black history in Japan, then the Japanese had access to this Black history that has to do with Japan, right? Well, let's see what kind of inspiration the Japanese would have taken from this kind of article. One of the things that this page says is that in Japanese images, the Black people are often depicted as Oni. And given that this game is called Onimusha, you probably know where I'm going with this. So, but anyway, yes, it does say that both Blacks and Whites were depicted as Oni. But I'm going to get around that because remember that it translates the word Oni to mean demon. So the words ogre and demon are called Oni in Japanese, at least for now, until we get like into Onimusha 2. But anyway, in the game Onimusha, there are two races that Samanosuke meets. One are the race of ogres, and the other are the race of demons. But to make things easy to keep track of, let's call the ogres Oni and the demons Genma. Why? Because in every game after Onimusha 1, that's what they're called. So, anyway, according to this article, Excluded Presence, it is like the Oni and the Genma represent the Blacks and the European Caucasians. But the only way that we can be sure that the Oni are supposed to be Blacks and the Genma are supposed to be Caucasians is if the history of the Oni and Genma in the game actually matches the history of Blacks and Hispanics. So with that said, what do the Oni tell us about their history in the game?
We are the clan of ogres that has been subverted by the demons.
So, the Genma subverted the Oni. Now, what does that mean? The dictionary definition of subvert is to overthrow. So, the Oni used to be kings and rulers, but the Genma, the demons, conquered them, took their rulership, and enslaved the Oni. Now, does that match Black history? Yes, because between 500 AD to 1500 AD, Blacks ruled Europe during a time called the Dark Ages. called the Dark Ages because dark people ruled Europe, yes. But in 1452 AD, Pope Nicholas V commanded Spain and Portugal to capture and enslave the black people who ruled Europe at the time. Therefore, the blacks were removed from Europe and the Caucasians took the land as their own. In other words, the black people were subverted by the Caucasians. This also explains why black people like Yasuke were slaves to the Portuguese who visited Japan. Now, if the Japanese saw these black people and bought a few of them and were as unfamiliar with black people as people say,
"Why is he not clean?"
"It is not dirt. It is the color of his skin, my lord."
then it is likely that the Japanese would interview the black people to see where they come from.
"Did you ink your skin black?"
And such interviews would allow the Japanese to know what the Spaniards and Portuguese did to the Moors. So, what does this tell us? 1. The Japanese actually had access to black history and what the Caucasians did to the blacks, because they would have asked. 2. The Japanese have a habit of painting blacks and Caucasians as Oni and demons. 3. The Oni and the demons in Onimusha actually fit the history of the blacks and Caucasians. All of this together means that the Oni in Onimusha actually do represent black people and the Ginma actually do represent Caucasians. Now, this gives us an example of how the Japanese use black history for their games, and also is the point of this video about me telling you I can find black people in Onimusha. Thanks to this history, now I have. Also, if you doubt that the Ginma are Caucasians, I've already done a video proving that they are. Just click on the icon and view it. Now, there is one other thing that I wanted to prove. You know how on my channel I often go into video games and find Black and Hispanic history in it, in games like Final Fantasy, Arc Lad, and basically whatever else I want to look at? Do you know why it is so easy to find the Bible in these games as well? Because you know, that's what my channel is. My channel is about finding scriptures in the game. So anytime I find black history, I've got a biblical scripture to go with it. Do you want to know why? It is strange though. After all, the Japanese are not a Christian society, so finding the Bible should not be that easy. So do you want to know why video games like Final Fantasy X, Dark Souls, and Onimusha have so many biblical references? Well, the reason is, as it turns out, blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans are literally the people of the Bible. So if you include them in your story in any capacity, I can find scriptures that relate to them. Now, most people who don't like the fact that blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans have a reason to be special, those kind of people will say that, oh, that's true for anyone. That if you put anyone in a story, you can always find the Bible. But that is not true. That is not so. For example, the Oni are a race subverted by the demons. Because that is part of the story about black people, I have a scripture that goes with it, right? Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 36. The Lord shall bring thee and thy king, which thou shalt set over thee, unto a nation which neither thou nor thy fathers have known. And there shalt thou serve other gods, wood and stone. So, the black man's king was brought into slavery under the foreign nation called the Caucasians. And did they serve other gods while they're enslaved by Caucasians? Yes, because the Caucasians made the blacks serve a Caucasian god. Similarly, the Hispanics and Native Americans were forced to serve that same Caucasian god when their kings were enslaved when the Europeans came to America. Now, tell me, if this is true for everyone, tell me a time when the Japanese kings were enslaved and the entire race was made to serve a Caucasian religion. No, that didn't happen. Only the blacks and Hispanics went through that, and maybe whoever it is that fits there that they were scattered to, like the Dalits and Zangzi and people in the Philippines. No, only them? Yeah, that is what I mean. You cannot easily find this applying to just anybody. So I can actually keep going if you think that that's just a one-off. For example, tell me when the blacks were made to serve the Arabian gods. Or tell me when the blacks were made to serve the gods of India. You know that happened, like the Dalits, right? Or tell me when the blacks were made to serve the gods of Japan. I'm pretty sure that obviously they served the gods of Japan when they went to Japan. So the point is, if you put Black history in the game, it will make that part of the game biblical. Because just because it's in the Bible doesn't mean that it relates to everyone. It relates to the people of the book, which are Black, Hispanics, Native Americans. So if you put Black history in the game, you're going to get the Bible. And if you just run with it and just make most of your game similar to Black history, the entire game will become biblical. For example, tell me about a story where a race of people were oppressed by a terrorizing power. And they tried everything to stop the killing. They prayed, they marched, they went to church, and they appealed to the politicians, but nothing worked. And now the people have lost hope and just wait to die. The only joy this oppressed people have is that they can cheer for their favorite teams in sports. But outside of sports, this race doesn't hold any hope of becoming anything worthwhile. Tell me, am I talking about a real race? Or am I talking about a video game? Am I talking about the blacks who are in the ghetto who tried to fight for equality? Am I talking about the Hispanics who tried to appeal to religion? Am I talking about the Native Americans who just sit in their ruined reservations, smoking and drinking because they have nothing else to live for and just wait to die? Or am I talking about Final Fantasy X?
William Julius Wilson, the sociologist who used to be at University of Chicago, did a study and was able to show that there was a cordon of employment discrimination around inner city neighborhoods. Somewhere between half and 3/4 of employers would not hire blacks under any circumstances. Now, you have the same kind of situation near reservations.
I walked clear down to this end, picked up applications, and if I could fill them out right there and talk to somebody right there, I did it. And then when I came back clear on this side of town. Well, nobody ever called. You could just tell they don't want to hire you. They look at you and they think, oh yeah, right, you know. Unless they're really in a dire need right now, they'll hire you. But if they got choices of who they're gonna hire, you can easily drive through town and see who's all hired.
They hit this wall of discrimination. They go around, they try all the fast food places, they try to get construction jobs, and they keep coming up empty-handed, and they start to think after a while, well, maybe it's me. Maybe there's something wrong with me. They end up going back to the reservation. Of course, there's no employment there, very little, except for with the government or the tribal government or the schools. And a lot of times get depressed, start drinking.
The alcohol is so strong, it has a grip on some people, or they feel like there's no hope.
It's a cycle of depression that started probably started about 500 years ago, but it especially hit when kids were taken from their families. I think losing wars, being disenfranchised, and not being understood by this group of people who came over and occupy this land. At one point, you just have to lay your head down on the table and say, I give.
Yeah, we had, cases where people just drank themselves to death. Young people, which was surprising to me. We had a young guy, he's 25, I think he was, died of cirrhosis. Another girl, mid-20s, just drank themselves to death.
Is this really the time?
This is the only time. The players fight with all their strength. The fans cheer for their favorite team. They forget pain, suffering. Only the game matters. That's why Blitz has been around for so long. At least that's what I think.
Should I show you the scriptures that fit these three communities? Why should I? I have over 30 videos of scriptures, 30 videos of Final Fantasy X that if you watch them, you will get the scriptures that I'm talking about. Because, again, when you put blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans in the video game, finding scriptures to match the story is easy. So that is why I have 30 videos of Final Fantasy X scriptures. Why not? I'm sure I can spare one. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 29. And thou shalt grope at noonday, as the blind gropeth in darkness, and thou shalt not prosper in thy ways, and thou shalt be only oppressed and spoiled evermore, and no man shall save thee. So this verse means that you will grope or feel around looking for ways to solve your problems, but no matter what you try, you will never prosper. You will always fail. Instead, you're going to always suffer. You will always be oppressed. You will always be spoiled. Spoiled means others will take all the wealth you have, all the gold, diamonds, the minerals that are in your land, all of it. And as much as your race suffers and people see your suffering and people say that it's not humane to let people suffer like this, no one will actually try to help you. So again, tell me, with that verse that I just read for you, am I talking about blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans? Or am I talking about Final Fantasy X? Or actually, am I talking about Ark the Lad? Anyway, blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans are uniquely tied to the Bible. Anything that includes them will become biblical. And anytime you write about the Bible, in the same way, you will have a story about the blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, because the two cannot be separated. Let me give you an example of someone who tried to write a biblical story, and if you look into it, it's black. Chronicles of Narnia is about a witch who conquered the land that belonged to humans. All the time, she wants people to believe that she is human and that she has a right to the land and that she is the original owner of the land. Now, that story is supposed to be a Christian-based book, right? Or is it a story about how the Caucasians stole Europe from the Moors? A Caucasian meant to write a biblical story, but if you know history, the book instantly becomes black history. And that's because you cannot separate the Bible from black history. If you write one, you're immediately going to get the other. That is why Onimusha has a lot of biblical symbolism as well. The black history that is in the game adds the Bible to the story. Now, since we have discovered how black history influenced Japanese media, let's explore how the black people themselves influenced the media. Now, I know this sounds the same. This sounds like the same thing, but it's not. These are two different ideas. For you see, the black history influencing the media simply means that the Japanese added black history in their stories. And that is why the Oni would be the black people and those who conquer them are Caucasians. But that doesn't explain things like, why is the king of demons a serpent? That is not something a Japanese person would have thought up. That is something a Christian would have thought up. And what I'm coming with is black people directly influencing media means that the words and ideas that black people would have come up with, those things become part of the story. For example, a black person would have called the white man the white serpent. So in the next episode, we're going to find most of the biblical symbolism regarding the Genma. And we will explore how the symbolism reflects how black people felt about Caucasians during the time that the Japanese had to interview with them. Basically, we're going to find out in the Japanese game, why are Caucasians painted as the biblical explanation for Satan? Especially when the Japanese are not Christian. Next time on The Mex Effects.